The morning Zara Coleman was handed a mop and told to get to work, three things were true. She held a master's degree in hospitality management from Howard University. She had run the housekeeping operations of a 4-star hotel in Atlanta for 6 years without a single complaint filed against her department. And the man who had promised her the director position at the Shin estate had not answered his phone in 11 days. The fourth thing, the thing that would matter most, was that she had not yet realized what she was standing in the middle of. The Shin estate sat on 40 acres outside Chicago, hidden behind iron gates and a tree line so dense it swallowed sound. Most people in the city did not know it existed. The few who did knew better than to say the name aloud in the wrong company. The employment agency had called it a private residential property. Residential. As if that one word was large enough to cover everything happening behind those gates. She had arrived on a Tuesday in late October, when the trees along the drive were dropping the last of their leaves and the sky had that particular flat gray quality that Chicago wears in the weeks before winter commits. A car had collected her from the city. Not a taxi, a private car. A man who did not speak and did not meet her eyes in the mirror. And she had watched the skyline shrink behind her and told herself this was what opportunity looked like from the outside. Unfamiliar. A little cold. Worth it. By Thursday, the director position she had been hired for had quietly ceased to exist. The woman who delivered this information, a compact administrator named Carol, who wore a headset at all times and spoke with the flat efficiency of someone reading from a document she had not written, told Zara that the role was undergoing a structural review and that her placement would be temporarily adjusted in the interim. Temporarily. That word again. The word people used when they meant something permanent, but needed your compliance for a little longer. By Friday, Zara had been handed a uniform 2 sizes too large and a daily task sheet that began at 5 a.m. She held the uniform for a moment. Then she folded it over her arm and went to find her room. She could have left. That was what nobody understood later, that at any point in those first weeks, Zara Coleman could have walked out the gate and taken her credentials and her dignity somewhere else. She had options. She had always had options. Her former hotel manager in Atlanta had called twice since she left. The second voicemail was still saved on her phone, saved in the specific way you save things you are not ready to need yet. She stayed because of the contract. 22 pages. She had read every word, twice, then a third time with a highlighter, the way she had read every textbook in every class that mattered, because she had learned early that the difference between understanding something and knowing it was the second and third pass. The clause on page 14 was the one that held her. A financial penalty tied to proprietary information she had not yet accessed and could not prove she hadn't seen. It was the kind of language that did not exist to protect a secret. It existed to keep a person still. The number attached to the penalty was not incidental. It was precisely calibrated, large enough to be impossible, specific enough to be credible. She had called 2 lawyers. The first was a former classmate now working corporate law in Chicago. He read the relevant pages and was quiet for a moment, and then said the words she had already suspected. That fighting it would cost more than enduring it, and that whoever had written this clause had known that when they wrote it. The second lawyer said the same thing differently. He also said, with the particular discomfort of a man delivering news he finds embarrassing on behalf of his profession, that clauses like this one were legal, technically. That technically was doing heavy work in that sentence. She thanked both of them and did not call a third. His name was Gerald Marsh. He ran prestige domestic staffing out of a glass office on Michigan Avenue, the kind of building where the lobby alone was designed to make certain people feel they had arrived and certain other people feel they had not. He wore custom shirts in pale blue and gray and shook hands with both of his. The two-handed shake, the one that performed warmth so thoroughly it didn't need to actually produce any. He had looked at Zara across a mahogany desk 8 weeks ago and told her this placement was a career-defining opportunity. She had believed him because he had done his research. He knew about the Atlanta hotel. He knew about the awards, the department metrics, the rate at which she had been promoted. He spoke about her record with the fluency of genuine familiarity, and there was a version of that which was flattering, and a version of it that was something else, and she had made the error of assuming the first. She thought about his face every morning at 5 a.m. when the alarm pulled her out of sleep in the converted storeroom where she had been given a cot and a single shelf, and a window that looked onto the side of the service corridor wall. She thought about the specific quality of his smile. Not warm, she understood now, but precise. The smile of a man measuring the distance between what he had promised and what he intended. The estate had 14 rooms on the main floor. Her task sheet covered 9 of them. The remaining 5 were not her concern, she was told. Neither was the East Wing corridor, sealed at the far end by a door she had never seen open in daylight. She noted it on her first walkthrough and filed it away, the way she filed everything in this place that did not yet have a use. Her grandmother had called this habit keeping a slow account, the things you noticed without acting on, stored carefully, earning interest. The other staff gave her a wide berth in those first weeks. There were 6 of them. A cook named Mrs. Park, a Korean woman in her 60s who communicated almost entirely through food and small, disapproving sounds, and who had, on Zara's second morning, placed a bowl of plain rice porridge in front of her without comment, in a way that managed to be both perfunctory and kind. A security guard named Darius, a tall, quiet man in his 40s who had the particular stillness of someone who had spent years deciding what to notice and what to let pass, and who had chosen to let almost everything pass. 2 housekeeping staff, a woman named Rosa and a man named Tom, who had been here long enough to have stopped asking questions, and short enough to still flinch at certain sounds. And Carol, who appeared twice a day with task adjustments and disappeared before anyone could ask her anything. Nobody told her anything about the man who owned the estate. She did not ask. She had learned early that the questions worth asking were never the ones you said out loud. What she watched instead, in those first 3 weeks, the East Wing door opened twice, both times after midnight. Both times a low voice, Korean, unhurried, certain, gave instructions to Darius, who answered in English without looking directly at the door, the way people answer someone whose face they have agreed not to see. Both times a black car arrived within 20 minutes and disappeared within 40. No names, no raised voices, just the particular efficiency of people who had learned to move without leaving a shape in the air behind them. She watched Mrs. Park set a specific tray every morning, covered, exact, the same configuration of cup and covered bowl and folded cloth, and leave it on the kitchen counter for precisely 7 minutes before someone collected it without a sound. She watched the covered bowl come back empty. She watched Mrs. Park look at the empty bowl with the expression of a woman reading news in the most ordinary possible thing. She watched the groundskeepers avoid the east side of the property the way people avoid a street they have been warned about without being told why. She cleaned her 9 rooms every day with the precision of someone who had run a 4-star hotel, because precision was the only thing here that still belonged entirely to her. She made hospital corners on beds that no one slept in. She polished surfaces that no one touched. She did it because the work itself was honest, even if everything around it was not. And because she had understood very early in her life that you did not lower your standard because the room did not deserve it. The standard was not for the room. It was for you. On the 21st day, she found the envelope. It had slipped behind the radiator in the 3rd guest room, old enough that the corners had gone soft from months of warmth, the paper the color of something kept too long in the dark. She almost set it aside. Then she turned it over and saw the name on the front. Not an estate name. Not a business name. A woman's name. 2 words. The first, a Korean given name she did not recognize. The second, a surname that matched the gate at the end of the drive. Written in a hand that pressed hard into the paper, the way people write when they are not sure the words will hold. When they need the pen to do more than a pen can do. Zara stood in the silence of that room for a long moment. The radiator clicked beside her. Outside, a groundskeeper crossed the far edge of the garden and disappeared. She put the envelope in her pocket and went back to work. She did not yet know what was inside, but something in the quality of the air around her shifted, the way a house settles differently at the moment a decision has been made inside it. A slight redistribution of pressure, subtle and certain, and already completely too late to undo. Before we go further, if you are new to AfroKorean Cipher, welcome. This channel exists for stories exactly like this one. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, stay with me. She did not open the envelope that night. This surprised her afterward when she thought about it. She was not a woman who delayed. She made decisions cleanly and carried them forward without looking back. It was the thing her mother had called her greatest strength, and her college roommate had called genuinely exhausting. And both of them had been right in the way that accurate observations about a person can be both a gift and a wound, depending on the day. But she held that envelope in her palm in the dim light of the storeroom and felt the weight of it. Not the paper weight, the other kind. The weight of something that has been waiting a long time for a specific pair of hands. And she thought, not yet. Not because she was afraid of what was inside, because she understood, with the particular clarity that comes from 3 weeks of watching a place breathe, that some information is a door. And once you walk through a door, you cannot unknow the room on the other side. You carry it with you. It changes the shape of everything that follows. She had learned this twice in her life already, once at 19, once at 26, and both times the knowledge had arrived faster than she was ready for it. And both times she had managed, but not without cost. She wanted one more night of not knowing. She put the envelope in the lining of her work bag, beneath the false bottom she had sewn in on her 3rd day. A habit from years of working in environments where other people's hands had a way of finding other people's things. Not maliciously, just in the thoughtless way of people who had never been required to treat other people's belongings as separate from the general furniture of their world. She had kept the needle and thread in her kit since her 2nd job. Old habit. Good one. She went to sleep with the specific, deliberate blankness she had taught herself at 22. The practice of setting down what you could not act on until morning and letting it wait in the dark. Not suppressed, just parked. Her grandmother had called it resting your knowing. She had thought it sounded like something printed on a tea towel when she was young. She understood it now. She woke at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm. A sound had pulled her up. Not loud, not alarming in itself, but wrong in the particular way that sounds are wrong when a place that is always quiet produces something new. The ear recognizes the wrongness before the mind has named it. Footsteps. Measured. Close. Not in the service corridor. In the room adjacent to the storeroom. A small sitting room that had been locked every day since she arrived, listed on her task sheet only as surface dusting, which she had interpreted to mean the inch-wide strip of floor visible through the keyhole gap. She lay still. She counted. 12 steps in. A pause that lasted perhaps 90 seconds. 12 steps out. Then a door opened. Not the service corridor door. A different one. One she had mentally catalogued as a closet since her first day because the frame was narrower than standard. It opened. It closed. And then the particular quality of the silence changed again, settling back into itself the way water settles after something passes through it. She rose at 5 a.m. as scheduled. She did her work. She noted that the dust on the closet door handle was disturbed and filed this without comment. At 11 a.m., she was in the second-floor east hallway changing linens, the hallway she was not authorized to access, which she had accessed because Rosa had called in sick and someone had to cover, and she had observed 3 weeks ago that the access door used the same key as the linen storage, which was either an oversight or a test, and she had decided it was an oversight, when she turned a corner and walked directly into Shin Jae-won. She knew who he was before she saw his face. She knew because the corridor changed. There was no other way to say it that was fully accurate. The temperature did not change. The light did not shift. But something in the pressure of the space rearranged itself. The way a room reorganizes around a center of gravity it has been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. She had felt this once before, in a boardroom in Atlanta, when the CEO entered 40 seconds after everyone else, and the meeting, which had been moving along just fine, suddenly understood it had not yet actually started. It was the quality of a person whose presence was not incidental to the room they occupied. He was at the end of the corridor, still. Not startled, he had heard her first, she understood immediately, and had chosen to stop and wait rather than retreat, which told her something. He was dressed in charcoal, no tie, jacket hanging open with the particular ease of a man who had stopped thinking about how he looked in rooms a long time ago. His face held an expression that was almost neutral, the face of a man who had trained himself for years to disclose nothing and had very nearly perfected it, except for the eyes, which were engaged in a project his face was not. He looked at her the way you look at something you half recognize. Something that belongs to a category you have encountered before, but this specific version is slightly outside the category's edges. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, counted, then lowered her eyes to the linen in her arms. "Apologies. I'll use the service staircase." "You're new." His voice was even, not an accusation, barely even an observation. More like confirmation of a calculation already running. 3 weeks, she said. A pause. "You're in the East Wing." "One of the other staff is out. I was covering the linen round." He said nothing. She did not fill the silence. She had learned in 11 years of professional life that the person who filled silences first was usually the person who needed something from the conversation. And she had made a decision at 4:47 that morning, listening to 12 measured footsteps in an adjacent room, that she was not going to need anything from this conversation. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zara Coleman." A pause, longer than the others. The kind of pause that has content in it. She looked up because the silence had a texture that required looking. He was watching her with an expression she could not fully parse. Not cold, not warm, but precise in a way that was more unsettling than either. A man running a specific calculation about a specific problem and finding the result interesting. "The East Wing is restricted," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." She turned to go. 4 steps. Then her name, not Coleman, her first name, Zara, spoken without effort, as if it had always been available to him. She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. "The linen in the 3rd room," he said. "Leave it." She turned then. "The sheets need changing." "I know," he said. He held her gaze with a steadiness that did not ask for anything and did not offer anything, and was, she would think later, one of the most honest things she had seen in this house. "Leave it." She left it. She walked back down the service staircase with the clean linen folded over her arm and her face arranged in the expression she wore when her mind was moving too fast to let anything show through. And she thought about a man who locked his own East Wing from the inside and kept a specific room untouched, and had given her instructions about it in the tone of someone who expected to be understood, not obeyed. Those were different things. Obedience was simple. Understanding required that you actually see the person in front of you. She thought about the name on the envelope in the lining of her bag. That night, alone in the storeroom, with the door wedged shut with the particular wedge she had fashioned from a folded task sheet on her first week, because the lock was inadequate, and she was not going to sleep in an inadequately locked room if she had any say about it. She opened the envelope. She read the 6 pages inside twice. Then she sat with them in her lap and let herself be very still for a long moment. What she was holding was not a mystery. It was an answer to a question she had not known she was asking. She understood now why Gerald Marsh had placed her here. She understood why the contract had been written to keep her still. And she understood that the man at the end of that corridor, still face, calculating eyes, her name in his mouth like something he had known how to say for longer than 3 weeks, was either the most dangerous person she had encountered in a life that had included some genuinely dangerous people, or the one person in this building who was not what he appeared to be. She sat for a long time. She did not yet know that he was in the East Wing at that exact moment, at the desk she had not yet seen, reading a file with her name on the cover and her photograph paper-clipped to the inside of the front page. The papers were 6 pages. The first 3 were financial records, transfers between 2 shell companies, amounts structured just beneath the threshold that triggered automatic federal review. The kind of clean that required a great deal of invisible work to maintain. She had seen this architecture once before, in a situation she did not like to think about, and she recognized it the way you recognize a handwriting style. Not the content, the method. The last 3 pages were correspondence between Gerald Marsh and a man named Victor Hale. 4 years of letters, the language careful in the way that language becomes careful when the people using it have learned that words leave evidence, and evidence has consequences. But careful language still has a shape, and the shape of these letters was not difficult to read once you understood the grammar of it. Victor Hale had something that belonged to Shin Jae-won. Gerald Marsh was the mechanism by which it was being kept from him. And the structure around that arrangement, the shell companies, the transfers, the carefully maintained thresholds, was built to be durable. Years of work. Not improvised. Intended. She read all 6 pages twice. Then she put them back in the envelope and sat in the dark, and let herself run the implications the way she ran numbers. Not rushing toward a conclusion, just following each thread to its natural end. 3 possibilities for why the envelope had been in that room. Someone had hidden it there, knowing the room would be cleaned eventually, trusting discovery to chance and to whoever happened to clean it. Someone had lost it in that room, which given what it contained seemed impossible to believe. Or someone had placed it there, knowing she would clean that room, knowing she would find it, knowing she was the kind of person who would understand what she was holding. The third possibility required a level of premeditation that made something tighten in her chest in a way she needed a moment to identify. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to the feeling of looking down and realizing the ground beneath you is further away than you assumed. She put the envelope in the bag lining and lay down and looked at the ceiling and thought about Gerald Marsh's face. The 2-handed handshake, the pale blue shirt, the smile that she now understood had been performing a specific function, keeping her looking at his warmth so she wouldn't look at his arithmetic. He had needed someone clean, someone with verifiable credentials, an unambiguous record, a reason to be in this house that would not raise questions. He had needed someone capable enough to actually do the job, because a truly incompetent plant would be noticed and removed, but in a position vulnerable enough to the contract that she would stay. He had spent 8 months building a file on her. She understood this now in the way you understand something that has been true for a while and is only just becoming visible. She had been selected, not trapped, selected. There was a difference, and the difference mattered, even though she could not yet fully articulate why. She rose at 5 a.m. She did her work. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Park slid a plate across the counter in her direction without looking at her. Rice, a fried egg, a small dish of something pickled that was sharp and warm simultaneously, and returned to her stove. She had not done this before. Zara looked at the plate for a moment. Small things told you what large things could not, and a woman who communicated almost entirely through food had just said something. She ate. She kept working. At 2 p.m., she was in the main floor library, a room she had developed a specific feeling for, the way you develop feelings for spaces that take their quiet seriously. That smell of cedar and old paper, and the particular loneliness of books that are owned but never opened. When she heard the east wing door, in the middle of the afternoon, the first time in 3 weeks she had heard it before dark. She did not move. 2 voices, Jae-won's and another, American, clipped, the cadence of a man who considered his own time a finite and valuable resource and wanted everyone in his vicinity to understand this. She could not make out words, only pressure. The American voice was pressing. Jae-won's was a flat wall. Then a single sentence, quiet enough that she should not have been able to hear it. Except the library shared a wall with the east corridor, and old houses had a way of carrying sound in directions that were never intended. She doesn't know what she found. Silence. Then the American voice, lower. Make sure it stays that way. A door. Footsteps retreating. The estate going quiet again. Zara stood between the bookshelves with a cloth in one hand and understood 3 things at the same time. They knew about the envelope. They did not know she had opened it. And the man she had been placed in this house to watch, or distract, or neutralize, she still did not know which, was not who she had been told he was. I need to stop here for a moment. I know some of you are already 2 steps ahead. Stay with me, because what she does next is the thing that changes everything. She finished dusting the library. She replaced the cloth. She walked to the storeroom, retrieved the envelope, carried it to the small bathroom at the end of the service corridor, the one with the lock that actually worked, and photographed every page. Carefully, each page flat, fully in frame, fully legible. Then she went back to the 3rd guest room and replaced the envelope behind the radiator. Same position, same angle, same depth. She walked out and went back to work. 3 days passed. She moved through them steadily, without visible urgency, with the surface calm she had cultivated over years of working in environments where showing what you were actually thinking was a liability. She cleaned her rooms. She noted that Darius had adjusted his security pattern, varying his rounds by 15 to 20 minutes in a way that was deliberate but not dramatic. The change of a man who had been asked to look less predictable without being told why. She noted that Mrs. Park had begun leaving a small portion of whatever she cooked for the household at the edge of the counter at 6 p.m. every day. Not presented, just left, in the way you leave something for a person you are not ready to acknowledge leaving something for. On the 4th day, Shin Jae-won found her in the East Garden. It was a narrow space behind the main building, iron fence along the back, a line of boxwoods that had not been properly maintained in at least 2 seasons, dead growth matted at the base. She was on her knees clearing it, not because it was on her task sheet, because she had looked at it for 3 weeks, and the drainage along the east wall was backing up, and that was the kind of thing that became expensive quietly. The kind of problem that looked small and felt small until the foundation repair bill arrived. She heard the door behind her open and close. She did not turn. His footsteps stopped about 6 feet away. She kept working. The dead stems came out in clusters, root systems soft from sitting in backed-up water. "You found something," he said. Not a question, not an accusation. The tone of a man offering a key with no visible lock to try it in. She pulled a stem free and set it aside. "The drainage along the east wall is backing up. You'll want it cleared before the first hard frost, or you're looking at foundation damage by spring. I can have a contractor here within the week if you want me to arrange it." A pause. "That's not what I said." "I know what you said." She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. In the flat afternoon light, he looked different from the corridor. Less composed, or rather, the composition was the same, but the weight underneath it was more visible. Not undone. He was not a man who came undone, but carrying something. The way a well-built structure carries load, visibly to someone who knew what they were looking at. "I'm a housekeeper, Mr. Shin. What I found was a drainage problem." He looked at her for a long moment. His hands were in his pockets. The stillness was the same as always, but it had a different quality today. Not the stillness of a man withholding, but of a man waiting. She had learned by now to distinguish between those 2 things. "Gerald Marsh placed you here," he said. "He did." "Do you know why?" She held his gaze. "He told me it was a career-defining opportunity." Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly. Closer to the expression of a man who has confirmed a suspicion and found no satisfaction in being right. He was quiet for a moment. She let the quiet sit. Behind her, the boxwoods moved slightly in the November wind. A dry sound. The sound of things that had given up holding on. Go inside, he said. It's getting cold. She rose, brushed the soil from her knees, picked up her tools. Mr. Shin, she said it without turning back. The drainage. I wasn't making conversation. I know, he said. She went inside. She did not hear him follow for a long time. When she passed the east wing door later, she heard him inside. Not speaking, not on a phone, just moving. And then the sound of a filing drawer pulled open with more force than necessary. The sound of a man who had been very controlled for a very long time and was directing what he could not show elsewhere. That night, she sent the photographs to an email address she had created 3 years ago, registered under a name that was not hers, on a server in a jurisdiction that made access without consent legally complicated. She had set it up after the Atlanta situation, the one she didn't discuss, for exactly this kind of day. Not paranoia, preparation. There was a difference. She did not send the photographs to a lawyer. She did not send them to a journalist. She did not send them to anyone who could act on them immediately, because the most powerful thing about having information was not deploying it. It was holding it. The moment you deployed it, it stopped being yours. She had it. She would know when to use it. She put her phone back in the toe of her left boot and went to sleep. The man who arrived on Thursday was not expected. She knew this because Mrs. Park burned the rice. In 6 weeks, she had never seen Mrs. Park burn anything. The woman cooked with focused precision. Each element of each meal treated as a small act of professional pride. And she did not relinquish that control for any reason Zara had yet observed. The burned rice meant a disruption she had not been given time to prepare for. An arrival that bypassed whatever protocol the household normally ran on. Zara was in the corridor adjacent to the kitchen when the front door opened. She stepped back into the supply alcove without deciding to. Pure reflex. The instinct of someone who had learned that the first seconds of an unplanned encounter were the most informative, and you could not observe them if you were in the middle of them. The man was broad across the shoulders, dressed in a suit that had been made for him specifically. American. Somewhere between 50 and the version of 50 that money maintains carefully. He moved through the entrance hall with the ease of a person who had stopped expecting to be challenged in spaces he entered. Not arrogance exactly, but the deeper thing that arrogance eventually settles into when it has been confirmed enough times. 2 others came in behind him and took positions without being directed, which meant they had been here before. Victor Hale. She had no photograph, but she had the shape of the name from those letters, and this man matched it the way a handwriting sample matches its original. He was directed to the east wing by Darius. The door closed. She went back to work. For the next 2 hours, she moved through her tasks with complete surface calm. She was very good at this. She had been good at this since she was 8 years old and had learned that showing a reaction was a way of giving something away for free. And she had never been inclined toward unnecessary generosity. At 4 p.m., she was carrying towels through the 2nd floor corridor when voices rose from below. Not raised exactly, but pressurized, the kind of contained tension that was argument with the volume managed. Hale. Running out of time. You know what happens if this reaches the board before we're positioned. Jae-won, quieter, which made it more final. I know exactly what happens. Then you understand why I'm here. I understand why you think you're here. A silence, the kind with weight. Then Hale, lower and with a new quality, something between warning and question. The woman Marsh placed. She's still here. She is. That was the arrangement. 6 weeks, then a rotation. It's been 6 weeks. The arrangement changed. Zara stood on the landing above, with the towels folded over her arm, and her breathing even, and her mind very still, in the way it went still when something important was about to become clear. Changed how? Hale's voice had sharpened. Caution and threat, sharing the same sentence. She found the correspondence. Completely even. All of it. The silence that followed was a different kind. The silence of a room recalculating. Then she needs to be, she photographed it, and sent copies somewhere I cannot access. A pause. She is not a liability, Victor. She is a variable. I don't remove variables. I understand them. Zara stood very still on the landing and breathed through her nose and felt the full architecture of the situation settle into clarity around her. Jae-won had known she opened the envelope from the moment she replaced it. 3 days of silence had not been inaction. They had been assessment. He had been deciding what she was. And he had just told Victor Hale his conclusion. She finished her round. She delivered the towels with hands that were completely steady. She went back to her storeroom and sat on the edge of her mattress and gave herself 60 seconds. The 60 seconds she always allowed for things she could not immediately act on. To feel the full weight of her position. Then she stood up. She needed to see the inside of the East Wing before Victor Hale left this estate. She went in at 2 a.m. The key had taken her 4 days. Not stealing, that would be noticed, and she had no intention of being noticed for anything she could not account for. Not copying, she had no tools for it. But she had spent her first days here cataloging every lock in the main floor, and on her 8th day, she had found what she was looking for. An old house, built in sections over decades, expanded without consistent hardware updates. The East Wing service door shared a lock with the linen storage. Same skeleton key, same worn brass. Both original to a 1940s construction. The estate's contractor had never bothered to rekey them. Why would he? They were service doors. Nobody important used them. She had noted it. She had waited. The East Wing at 2 a.m. smelled of cedar and paper, and something older beneath both. Metal, she thought, and the specific quality of a space that was used seriously, not for living, but for working, for the kind of concentrated effort that leaves a residue in a room the way smoke leaves a residue, invisible, but present. She moved without a light. She had mapped it by ear over 6 weeks. The main room at the end of the corridor was larger than she had imagined. 3 walls of files. Not decorative, not archival in the kept for appearance sense, but working files, referenced files. Pulled and replaced often enough that the tabs were worn. A desk with 3 screens, all dark. And the corkboard. She had known about the corkboard from the sounds. She had not known the scale. It covered most of the western wall, the kind of board used by people who understood that the most sensitive connections should never exist in any system that could be accessed or corrupted or subpoenaed. Thread and photographs and handwritten notes. The physical evidence of 4 years of careful, patient, methodical work. She did not touch anything. She stood in front of it and looked. In the center, Gerald Marsh. 3 photographs taken without his knowledge. The angles made this clear. Shot from across streets, through windows, from elevation. A surveillance record, not a file. From Marsh, a red thread to Victor Hale. From Hale, a black thread to a name she did not recognize, Aldrich Bond. A photograph. Older man, heavy, caught through restaurant glass, blurred at the edge. German name, German face. From Bond, a line to a corporate name, a holding structure she had seen referenced in the financial pages she had photographed. And below the corporate name, a date. Circled twice in red marker, the pen pressed hard enough to leave a slight ridge in the corkboard surface. 11 days from now. She stood in the dark and looked at the board, and understood that Shin Jae-won had not been in this house waiting. He had been building. 4 years of building. The way you build something you intend to be permanent. Slowly, with attention to structure, without the errors that come from rushing. What he was building was a case. Not legal, not in the conventional sense. Something older than that. The kind of reckoning that did not require a courtroom. The envelope she had found had not been lost, had not been careless. It had been planted. She stood with this understanding for long enough to let it fully settle. Then she took what she came for. 4 minutes with the corkboard, photographed in sections, no detail missed, and left the east wing with the door locked behind her at 2:31 a.m. In her storeroom, she sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at the photographs on her phone, and thought about a man who had known from the moment she arrived who she was, what she was capable of, and precisely what she would do when she found what he had left for her. She thought about the way he had said her name in the corridor. Zara. Not her title, not her last name, her first name, with the ease of something already known. She thought about Darius, who had called her Coleman from the first day, because Darius knew her only as the new staff. Jae-won had known her name before she said it. She sat with this for a long time. She had come into this house believing she was Gerald Marsh's mechanism. She was beginning to understand she was something else. The question that kept her awake until the first gray light came through the high window, was whether the difference between those two things was large enough to matter. She thought it was. She was not yet certain enough to move on that, but close. She found out about the file on a Tuesday. Darius was on the phone in the security office, a small room off the main entrance, door 3 inches open, which was 3 inches more than usual. She was replacing a light fitting in the adjacent hallway. The task had taken her 23 minutes longer than it needed to because the adjacent hallway was adjacent to the security office, and she was comfortable with that accounting. Coleman file, Darius said. A pause. Yes, Marsh built it over 8 months. References, credentials, employment history, all verified. She is exactly who she says she is. A longer pause. That's the point. He needed someone clean, someone you could place without raising questions, someone whose record made the placement look legitimate. Another pause. She held the contract because the contract was written for her specific situation. Income, assets, legal exposure. All of it calculated. She kept her hands on the light fitting. No, Darius said. He didn't expect her to be this. A pause. Neither did I. She finished the fitting. She moved down the hallway. She allowed herself to feel, briefly and completely, what it felt like to learn that 8 months of her professional life, the cultivated record, the careful reputation, the work, had been not incidental to why she was chosen, but the exact mechanism of it. That she had been profiled like a property, Assessed for exploitability. Selected. 60 seconds. She gave it exactly that. Then she let it settle into the part of herself where things went when they were true and could not be changed and needed to be carried without being displayed. That afternoon, Shin Jae-won came to find her in the library. He sat in the chair by the east window, a chair she had cleaned around 6 times without ever seeing occupied, and said nothing. She kept working. The room had the low afternoon light again, that specific November gold through old glass, the light of a day in its last hour deciding to be generous about it. After a while, he said, "You went into the East Wing." "I don't know what you're referring to," she said. "The black thread connecting Hale to Bon. It was shifted 2 millimeters." She put the cloth down and turned to face him. He looked back at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. The calculation was still there. She did not think the calculation ever fully left his face, but it was no longer concealing itself. Beneath it was something else. Not vulnerability exactly, more like the face of a man who had been alone with something for a long time and had stopped pretending he wasn't tired. "I needed to understand what I was part of," she said. "And now you do." "Some of it." She paused. "Victor Hale has been moving assets from a joint holding structure. Assets that aren't his. The man he's moving them for is the reason your father's company no longer exists. The board meeting in 11 days is the deadline." She looked at him. "You've been building documentation for 4 years. You need it to reach the right people before Thursday. You can't move it yourself because everything you do is watched." A pause. "You needed someone inside this house with no visible connection to you. Someone with a legitimate reason to be here. Someone clean." She held his gaze. "Someone capable." He was very still. "Capable was the requirement," he said quietly. Clean was secondary. The library held the silence between them. Outside, a car moved along the distant road, its sound swallowed by the tree line almost immediately, as if the estate had refused to admit it. She thought about Gerald Marsh and the 2-handed handshake and the 8 months of careful research and the contract designed to hold her still. She thought about what it meant that 2 different men had looked at her record and her capability and decided what to do with it, and that the decisions they had made were not the same. "There's something I need first," she said. "Name it." "The contract voided, in writing, before I do anything else." He held her gaze. "Done." "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he said. She nodded once, picked up her cloth, went back to the shelves. She needed him to understand, and she believed he did, which was why she did not say it aloud, that she was not doing this for him. Not against Gerald Marsh, not for the satisfaction of a resolution, not because a powerful man had asked. She was doing it because she had spent 6 weeks cleaning rooms under a fraudulent contract in a house that had been designed to keep her still. And she had spent every one of those 6 weeks becoming exactly the opposite. The contract being voided was not a reward. It was a correction. What came after, the documentation, Victor Hale, all of it, was what she chose to do with the freedom once she had it back. The contract arrived at her door at 10 p.m. A single page. The language was precise and unambiguous, cleaner than the original 22 pages, which was fitting since the original had required considerable effort to construct, and this required only the truth. Voided in full. Signed and notarized with a seal she had already verified as legitimate, because she had spent 20 minutes researching Illinois notary requirements in her first week against exactly this kind of moment. the way she prepared for most things, without announcing the preparation, without being sure it would ever be needed, but without being willing to be caught without it. She read it twice. She photographed it. She put it in the lining. Then she stood in the corridor for a moment and understood that something had shifted. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony, but definitively. The weight that had sat across her shoulders since the morning she read page 14 was gone. Not lightened, gone. The absence of it was so complete it was almost a physical sensation, like stepping out of a building into open air after a long time inside. She knocked on the east wing door. He opened it himself. The room behind him was lit, the corkboard visible, the screens dark, the files as she had seen them at 2 a.m., but now with the desk lamp on, the space inhabited rather than simply occupied. He looked at her with the expression she had come to understand as his version of available. Not open exactly, but no longer closed. He handed her a sealed folder. 3 names, he said. I'll give you the addresses. I know the addresses, she said. A pause. Of course you do. She held the folder. She almost said something. She was not certain afterward what it would have been. The moment had the specific quality of a last pause, the kind that occurs at the point where the road that existed until now ends, and the one going forward has not yet been named. The woman whose name was on the envelope, she said. His face changed. Small and swift and completely unguarded. The expression of a person touching a wound they have learned to touch carefully. My mother, he said. She had known. Since the night she opened it and read the handwriting, that pressing, frightened, deliberate hand, she had known that the fear in it was not the fear of a stranger. It was the fear of someone writing about the thing nearest to them. Someone writing a letter they were not sure would ever be found, and were not sure they wanted found, and were leaving anyway because the alternative was letting it disappear with them. She placed it there, Zara said, before she became ill. She knew the room would be cleaned eventually. He was quiet for a moment. She knew that whoever found it, if they were the kind of person who understood what they were holding, would either use it against me or use it correctly. She trusted the house to find the right person. Zara thought about this. A woman in this house 4 years ago, already knowing she was leaving, pressing a pen hard into paper, and trusting a stranger she would never meet to be equal to what she was leaving behind. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Zara said. She was. 2 words, completely level. The weight entirely in what was not said around them. Zara looked at him for one more moment. Then she took the folder and left through the front door. Not the service entrance, the front door. She had used the service entrance every day for 6 weeks, and she was finished with that. The night air was very cold. The estate grounds were dark, the tree line invisible against the sky. She had 3 stops to make before morning. She made them. The board meeting was in 9 days. She was not in the building when it happened. She was in a coffee shop 4 blocks from the address she had memorized 3 days ago, both hands around a cup of coffee she had stopped tasting an hour earlier, watching the time on her phone and letting herself be very still. The 3 people she had delivered documentation to were a federal compliance attorney named Margaret Osei, who had spent 11 years building cases against financial structures exactly like the one in those pages. A financial journalist named David Park, no relation to Mrs. Park, who had been investigating Aldrich Bond for 2 years and had told anyone who would listen that he was missing one piece. And Dr. Patricia Owens, chair of the board's ethics committee, who had a reputation across 2 industries for precisely 2 things: incorruptibility and a specific and well-documented intolerance for being deceived. Zara had not explained the documents to any of them. She had not instructed them, directed them, or told them what to do. She had left them each a sealed envelope with the documentation inside and a single sentence on the outside. Verify before Thursday. They had 9 days. The documentation was thorough enough that 9 days was more than sufficient. Jae-won had spent 4 years making it thorough enough. On the morning of the meeting, she sat in the coffee shop and thought about Gerald Marsh. Not with anger. She had never been a person who maintained anger past its useful point. With something colder and more accurate. She thought about his glass office and his custom shirts, and the 2-handed handshake, and the 8 months of careful, invasive research he had conducted on her life, her record, her specific legal and financial vulnerabilities. She thought about the way he had smiled when he said career-defining. The specific smile of a man who found his own cleverness enjoyable. She thought, I hope you are finding this morning educational. At 9:14 a.m., she received a message from a number she did not recognize. 3 words. It is done. At 10:30 a.m., she received a call from David Park, the journalist, who said only, I'll need 2 hours of your time this week, for your protection as much as the story. She said she would be in touch. At 11:47 a.m., she looked up Gerald Marsh's office building on her phone and found a public records notification that had appeared in the last hour. A federal compliance inquiry, initial filing, the kind of document that was public specifically because transparency in these matters served the public interest. The glass office on Michigan Avenue would not look the same from the inside today. She knew this without needing to see it. Darius called at 12:15 p.m. She had not given him her number. She had understood for some time that this was irrelevant. The meeting went as it needed to, he said. Mr. Shin asked me to tell you. A pause. That's all. She sat in the coffee shop and held the phone and let herself feel, briefly and without performing it for anyone, what it felt like when something you worked toward in the dark arrives in the light. It did not feel like triumph. It felt quieter than that, more like the specific relief of setting down something heavy, not because the weight was unbearable, but because you had carried it to where it needed to go, and you could now put it down. She thought about his mother, pressing words into paper in a house she was already leaving, trusting the future to be capable. She went back to her hotel, her own room, her own name, her own card, and she ordered food, and she sat on a bed with clean white sheets, and she let herself be still for the rest of the day. Her phone rang at 9 p.m. Unknown number, Chicago area code. She answered. The compliance filing will be public by Friday, he said. No greeting, as if the conversation had been ongoing somewhere and this was simply its continuation. Marsh's agency loses its operating license within 30 days. The original contract, all copies, has been destroyed. I photographed it, she said. I know. A pause. The photographs are yours. Everything that came from this house belongs to you. I want to be clear about that. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the hotel window, Chicago was doing what it did in November, pressing cold and light against everything, indifferent and magnificent. Is that what you called to tell me? She said. A longer pause than she expected. No, he said. She waited. I called to ask if you would come back. He said it with the same evenness he used for everything, but she had 6 weeks of reading his specific silences, and she heard what was underneath it. Not as a housekeeper. The director position, the original role. It was never filled. It exists. The estate requires someone who is actually capable of running it. She looked at the ceiling. "You spent 6 weeks letting me clean your floors," she said. "You spent 6 weeks learning every room in the house, the pattern and habits of every person in it, the structural drainage failure in the East Garden, and the contents of a corkboard you were never meant to see." A pause. The floors were incidental. She almost laughed. The almost laugh arrived without announcement, from somewhere she hadn't expected, and it changed the weight of the room in a way she noticed and filed. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take whatever time you need." She ended the call. She thought about it for 4 days. She went back on a Friday morning, her own car, her own route. Through the front gate, which she had only ever entered by private car arranged by someone else, and which she now entered in her own vehicle, which was a practical difference, and also not only that. She wore a charcoal coat she had bought 2 days after the board meeting. The kind of coat you buy when you have decided to stop minimizing the amount of space you take up. She had stood in the store for a long time looking at it. She had bought it because it was the right coat. She had worn it every day since. Mrs. Park was in the kitchen. She looked up when Zara came through the door and took in the coat and the posture and the specific way Zara Coleman moved through a space when she was not performing smallness for anyone's benefit, and made a sound low in her throat that contained more genuine welcome than most people managed with complete sentences. Darius was in the hallway. He looked at her and nodded once. The nod of a man who does not waste acknowledgement, but means it completely when he gives it. Rosa was on the main floor. She stopped when she saw Zara and then stood slightly straighter, in the way that people stand when someone has arrived who will require them to do their work well, and who they are not sorry about this. The director's office was on the main floor, a room she had cleaned 6 times without fully understanding what she was cleaning. It had a window overlooking the East Garden and a desk that had been cleared and polished, and a single key placed at the center of the desk surface with the deliberateness of an offering or an admission. She picked up the key. She turned it in her hand. The brass was worn at one edge from use. Shin Jae-won appeared in the doorway. He stood the way he always stood, contained, still, the cold surface intact. Except that she understood the surface now. She had seen what was underneath it, and she had decided what she thought about what was underneath it, and the surface looked different when you had done that. Not thinner, just less total. "The drainage along the east wall," she said. "I need a contractor by end of week. There's a list on the desk." I saw it. She put the key down and faced him. "I have conditions." I expected that. Staff compensation across the board is below market rate. That changes for everyone before the end of the month, effective this payroll cycle. Mrs. Park's rate specifically. I want to see the number before it goes through. He nodded. "I report to you directly. No agency involvement, no third-party administrative layer, no Gerald Marsh or any person connected to his operation." "Marsh's operation no longer exists," he said. "I know. I still want it on the record." Agreed. She sat down behind the desk. She opened the contractor list. The first name was the drainage contractor she had identified herself 3 weeks ago and mentioned to him in the East Garden, which she noted without comment. He remained in the doorway, not leaving, not entering, occupying the threshold in the way of a man who was waiting to understand whether he was welcome. "Mr. Shin." "Yes." "The corkboard in the East Wing." She kept her eyes on the list. "Is there more work to do?" A pause. "There is always work to do." "Then we'll need a better documentation system. One that doesn't involve placing evidence behind radiators and relying on the right housekeeper to find it." She looked up. "No offense to your mother's instincts. They were correct. The method has room for improvement." Something moved across his face, swift and unguarded and entirely different from anything she had seen on it before. Not the controlled shift of a man managing his expression, but the involuntary kind. The kind that happens when something catches you before you can meet it with composure. A grief acknowledged, and also, underneath it, something lighter. Something that might have been, in a different man with a different life, the beginning of a smile. He stood with it for a moment. He did not try to manage it. "My mother would have liked you," he said. It came out quiet and direct and completely without the careful construction that usually governed his speech. He seemed to hear himself say it. He stood slightly straighter. The composure reassembled itself, not rigidly, but naturally, the way something returns to its resting shape. She let it settle. "The contractor," she said. "I'll start calls this afternoon." He nodded. He stepped back from the doorway. Then he stopped. "Zara." She looked up. "Welcome back," he said. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she went back to the list. The afternoon light was doing the November thing through the East Garden window. Low angle, old glass, the specific gold of a day in its last hours, deciding to be magnificent about it rather than merely ending. She had first noticed this light in the library, on the day everything changed. It looked the same from this window. She thought it might look this way from many windows in this house, if you were in a position to see it. She worked through the afternoon. 6 calls. Drainage contractor confirmed for Thursday. 3 maintenance items scheduled. A supply order placed under her own name for the first time since she arrived. At 6 p.m., Mrs. Park appeared in the doorway without knocking. She knocked for no one, Zara was beginning to understand, and set a cup of tea on the desk and disappeared without a word. The tea was exactly as Zara took it. She had not told anyone how she took it. She sat for a moment with the cup in both hands, the warmth of it moving up through her palms, and looked out the window at the East Garden, where the boxwoods were finally cleared and the drainage path was visible in the late light, waiting for Thursday's contractor, a problem made visible and soon to be addressed. The estate was settling into evening around her. Groundskeepers finishing their last pass, the tree line going dark at the edges, the house making its small sounds of inhabitation. Mrs. Park in the kitchen, Darius at his post, Rosa finishing her round. She drank her tea. She had come into this house 6 weeks ago carrying a contract designed to keep her still. She was still here. But nothing about what that meant was the same. This was not the position Gerald Marsh had placed her into. This was not the role Shin Jae-won had originally designed her for. This was not the outcome that anyone in that chain of calculation and manipulation had planned or predicted. It was hers. Built in the margins, piece by piece, the way Aday's had built her education by torchlight in a notebook. The way every woman who had ever been placed somewhere small had built her way out. Not by waiting, not by asking, but by understanding the difference between the room she had been given and the one she was capable of occupying. She put down the cup. She turned back to her work. She had a great deal to do.